Yeah, may have something.
I guess we'll get started then. It's not going to be a long presentation, but I figured I should introduce like why I made the group. And at the end, I want to ask you guys questions about what you want the group to be as well.
Okay.
So I want to tell a short story basically of how I like started coding. I'm no expert by any means, but I think a lot of people basically have this idea that computer programming looks like this. Like it's some mystical art that they couldn't possibly understand.
Matrix type.
Yeah. And it's like, and if it's not this, then they imagine that it's extremely boring and of no practical use to their life unless they thought that they could get like a six-figure salary with it. So I used to be the same, you know. And the reason why I used to be the same is because of computer science education. And really science education in general, but computer science in particular. When I went to school, I didn't major in computer science, but I took a intro to computer science class, and I left that class thinking exactly what I just said on the past slide, that it's impossible, not for me. This picture is a picture of a written exam question. One of the strangest things to me was that our exams were on paper instead of on computer. I'm assuming it's because they didn't want you to Google anything, but I Google everything if I don't remember it. So it's like, if I'm using like 3 different languages and I forget the syntax of one, why wouldn't I just Google it?
Did you like type this out?
No, I just went to Google and searched for a written exam.
I'm saying like, so like it was like you have to fill in the answers in like a Word document or something, correct?
Oh, in my particular one, it was a written exam when you had to write it out.
Same here.
Mm.
Okay, makes sense. Okay, yeah.
And then the homework wasn't. The homework was on computer. But the problem with the homework was that they were all math questions. It was, I mean, which is fine. It teaches you how to do it. But like I wrote here, it's all technique and no application. Like it'll teach you how to use a for loop, for example, but not why or what would be the purpose of using a for loop. So basically just computer science education is boring, which is why people think it's boring. So like I said, I left that class thinking that I couldn't do it. Now, I ended up going to a different school, actually. I went to school for audio engineering. And I had basically an elective class called Intermedia Composition, which is a complicated word that basically means art that uses multiple media. And in this context, it generally means that you integrate technology into it somehow. So I used, basically this class sparked my interest in everything, so I kind of use it as a definition for creative coding or creative technology. It's basically when you have some sort of creative project, like you want something to happen, and it requires a custom technology to make it happen. So by custom technology, that could be anything from you need to write a software, it could be a simple software, a complex software. Maybe you need to actually build hardware, like use Arduino, microcontrollers and sensors, something like that. So it's the type of stuff that you probably wouldn't get hired to do, but a personal project. But also a lot of creative projects could be something that's actually useful if you want it to happen. So you actually could make money doing it potentially. And in this way, computer programming basically just becomes a tool that we can use to affect the world around us. It's not something that has to be like barred from you. It's like if you want to affect something and it requires a computer, then having some understanding of computer programming can let you make that happen. And so this is probably too small, but oh yeah, let me say this. So this is actually how I learned the fundamentals of coding. Like I didn't pass that class. This guy, his name is Daniel Schiffman on YouTube. And I think he's probably where I learned the phrase creative coding. And this is an example of him showing you how to make a snake game. And so actually by doing projects like this, simple games and things like this, you have to use all of the fundamentals. You have like all of these blocks have to be in an array. Each one is an object. You have to give it properties like what happens when a block gets eaten and then has to appear somewhere else. So it still uses all of the fundamentals of coding, but it's not just to create a calculation. It's something that's interesting to you. And this book here, I forgot to do this earlier. These are random books I have at home that if any of them interest you, you could like take a picture of them. Creative coding books of different kinds. This book here is about, it kind of talks about the aesthetics of using code in an art and design context. So on the next slide, I have like some examples from this book. Even though grainy picture, this is an example of algorithmic graphic design, where basically he started off with typography, and then he had to create a custom software to track these lines to create this new design. And this is an example of architecture. They created a pavilion using a recursion algorithm of rotating squares. Here's an example of a different way to tell time. So they used a slit scan technique and basically just broke it down into hours, minutes, seconds. This one is another architecture. They said it was a bridge where they were commissioned to try and create a bridge and design it and construct it in the smallest amount of time. So they had to use software basically to come up with like modular pieces to finish it. And this is an example of more architecture where they were making a tower. So they had parameters that they wanted the tower to fit into, and then they used a genetic algorithm to simulate different designs of the tower instead of having to build it or build a prototype. They just used genetic algorithm to figure out the best one. So these are like creative coding projects. Some of them have actual applications, as you can see in the architecture, and some of them could just be interesting for you. So my intermediate composition class. Like I said, I went to school for audio engineering, so I wanted to be a musician. So it was music-based. And there's this software called Max MSP. That's what we were learning in the class. And so this is what it looks like. It's an object-oriented programming language, but it's visual. So a lot of people consider text coding to be like scary for some reason. So this is just an object, you place it, and then since we were audio people, it's like signal flow. You just connect the objects.
It's in Ableton, right?
No, but Ableton bought Max, so that's why it looks like that. They have the same UI. So there's a thing called Max for Live, which so you can use Max to create custom Ableton plugins. And so my teacher introduced this software to us, saying that Max is really good at connecting things that otherwise can't be connected. So one thing he showed us was you could use UDP, which is a internet connectivity protocol, exactly. So he had us go on our phones, and he kind of created a node-based server with a tiny UI on it. We would press it, and that would send signal to his computer to make something happen. So he connected our phones to his computer. And then he showed us one that was like, you could use an Xbox controller. Basically anything that comes into the computer just comes out as numbers. So you can then change the numbers and then attach it to something else. Earlier I gave you guys an example of using an EEG. So yeah, you can use brainwaves to connect to whatever this is, and just connect each number to one of these knobs, and now you're using your brain to make something happen. So Max is one of many creative coding sort of softwares to do stuff like that. And so that's what we were doing in the class. Our actual project in this class was to make a major 7th chord arpeggiator. So this was after my text or my written exam, intro to programming class that I didn't pass. This was my next attempt at programming ever. So imagine this as an intro to programming student. This is their first project. So we were trying to make a major seventh chord arpeggiator, and over the course of the class, you could add features to it. So I wanted to make mine change speed and does everyone know what an arpeggio is, by the way? I'm assuming I know music. So an arpeggio is you take a chord and you play each note of the chord. So there are different patterns you can do. They're not important, but just know that there are different like set patterns you can do. And I wanted to be able to change the speed and pattern based on where my mouse was on the screen. And another one I wanted to do was to change the key just by hitting whatever key you wanted. And I also wanted to be able to change octave in major minor. So this is the final project, what it sounded like. So very simple demonstration, just showing you what we did in the class. Now, I call this the bug that changed my life, because I didn't think I could code. This is what I'm trying to explain, is that when I took a regular intro to coding class, I left thinking that coding is impossible. And when I had this class, I had a bug, like you do. So all this is showing is these are the frequencies that I want to play. Each one gets played. And what I wanted to do is be able to change the octave up and down. Usually, this is done by pressing Z or X on your keyboard, so I wanted to try and do that. Now, I had a bug that I couldn't figure out, which was that, first of all, I should say, in order to go an octave up, you double the frequencies. In order to go an octave down, you half the frequencies. So I figured, I just multiply it by 2 or a half. Now, my bug was that it would only ever apply the multiplication to the original frequencies. I just couldn't figure it out. I'm an intro student. I got very frustrated. This is how I felt. I just couldn't figure it out. And so I actually left class and went to the movies. And not even thinking about it, just while watching the movie, I figured out what to do. And that really struck me, because I just thought of, instead of thinking about it as like a frustrating, complicated thing, it was like an intellectual problem to solve. So the solution was, I ended up using exponents as like a data structure to keep track of how many times I had pressed Z or X. And again, this isn't important, this is just my program. But just to give you an example, I would just have 1/2 raised to how many times I pressed it, times 2 raised to how many times I pressed it. And that would give me the actual number of what octave I should be on. So what was interesting about this was that I was going to school for music. Like, I hadn't thought about math in forever. So it was completely, even though I was good at math in school, I just hadn't used it. So I was like, why did this solution pop into my head? And when I went home and worked, so that experience taught me that not only can I code, but it can be used for very cool purposes. And that opened up a new world for me. So these are pictures I took at a place called the Ars Electronica. Has anyone ever heard of the Ars Electronica? Daniel has, you have. What do you know about it?
Other than they just have, isn't new cameras and stuff like that? Or
not new cameras. They're not new cameras. Ars Electronica is a museum in Austria that is based around exactly what I'm talking about, creative technology and art. And they have a festival every year called the Ars Electronica Festival. And last year, I got the chance to go. So these are pictures I took while I was there. So this is it's kind of like, you could kind of think of it as like the global mecca of this. People came from all over the world to display their projects. This is an example of projection mapping. This woman mapped it on a curved fabric to look like she was trapped in it. This was an example of basically a phone game, but it was pitched as an interactive movie that would track your eye movements for certain interactive parts of the game. And it was, the story of it was based around data privacy. This was very interesting. This was a project, they commissioned a bunch of artists to try and paint a self-portrait that couldn't be detected by facial recognition. So this is his picture, this is his portrait, and here's a camera up here, and you can see that it's picking up his face but not his portrait. And the idea was just to get as close as you could to your actual face, but trick the algorithm to just see where it ends. And this was playing with different materials for a 3D printer. Some of them were like for fabrics, and this one just turned out as like a structure. This one was my favorite as an audio person. Suin, as a game person, you might know this. In Unreal, when you want to set up a sound for the player, it's like a dome, right? And they walk into the dome, and as they leave it, it does the...
It decreases.
Yeah, it does that calculation for you.
Yeah.
So they did this, but mapped it into real space. So each of these looked like a sound dome, and you put on headphones and you had a spatial tracker, and as you walked through it, different sounds would happen. And not shown here, when you turn this corner, there was all these crazy designs on the walls, and the sound changed to the soundscape that perfectly matched it. And as you went through it, it was like changing. So it was like being in a real life video game for the audio. So these are examples of like creative coding projects that you could do. And this is my joke that I always say is like, have you ever looked at like fantasy or anything where they have like a magic school and the kids aren't paying attention? And you're like, if magic was real, I would try to learn everything. I would try to learn every spell. But in every universe, magic is just how that world works, which means it would be studied by science. So in our universe, it just happens to look like that, where you just use scientific principles to make whatever you want to happen. And that is, it's not magic, but it is. That's what magic would be. Yeah, that is it. I have some questions for you.